Okay, so I've got a talk that's in a bit of a different direction, because instead of extending XNAT itself, I'm actually going to be talking about what I'm doing for testing it. I'm going to talk about three general categories. First thing is I'm using a library called Selenium, which lets you do web browser automation, which is pretty powerful for testing XNAT stuff. I do have a bunch of base XNAT tests, but I'm going to talk about the Cda Pipeline Tests, because they're a bit more interesting. And then what you can actually do with the results, which integrate into our issue tracker, Jira. So when people say Selenium, there's kind of two general things that can mean. There's the Selenium IDE. I put IDE in quotes because it is a Firefox browser extension, not really an IDE. So it's easy. You literally can click a record button and do stuff on your web page and then click play and it'll do it back. But if you want to really do anything with XNAT, it's not great. So it does not scale very well. It doesn't work outside of Firefox because it's a browser extension. So instead, what I use is the WebDriver package, which has a little bit of a learning curve, but it's not too bad. You can run it on a lot of different platforms. There's some problems with IE, which is a shocker. It can be a little bit of a pain in, actually, I think it's CentOS getting Chrome to work, which is why I'm mainly using Firefox. But you can just grab that as Maven dependency, throw it in, and get going. So basically, the main thing you want to do with Selenium is just finding elements on the page and doing something with it. So the gold standard is basically element IDs. So you can see I've got the actual page source up here. And in XNAT 1.7, that login button has an ID login button. Sometimes these are auto-generated, so they're not great. You can use better strategies of actually finding things. If you're using Chrome, you can put XPath directly in when you're looking at the source or the elements on the page. And that selector down there, you can't really read it. It's / asterisk, and then ID equals login button. That's XPath, which is pretty much equivalent to just finding by ID. But you can do a lot more powerful stuff that way. And then once you find things on the page, Selenium has a lot of built-in methods that you can do things like, the example up there is just click. So all you have to do is find the element that corresponds to the login button and click it. You can also send text, fill in fields, a lot of fun stuff like that. So basically, I've wrapped up a lot of that stuff to give me more bang for my buck in writing a lot more tests. So these are all available online. It's open source. I don't think anyone else has ever used it. So there's a risk there. But there's a new 1.7 package, which I'm working on. Since we're still finalizing what 1.7 is, I've got to mess with a lot of the code to get the UI from XNAT reflected in the package there. And then the last thing is for the Cda Pipeline Tests.
So, Charlie, if you download that, what will you get?
What do you get? Yeah. It's basically just a Java. So the NRG Selenium is a Java package I wrote, which is just giving you kind of a framework to write tests in. Right. So you just extend that a little bit, add some stuff, and you can write tests fairly easily. The Cda Selenium Pipeline Test, that's something that's actually using my NRG Selenium package. Okay. So that looks roughly like this. You give a schematic for it. It's using TestNG, but the nice thing about Selenium is that you're not tied to a testing framework. You can use what you want. You actually don't even have to do tests with it. You can just mess with web pages. But the thing it starts out with is app before suite annotated method, which basically says when I'm going to start out, I'm just going to make sure that the Selenium user is there, because you have to have a user in XNAT to do things. And then once you get into the test phase, this is specific to my pipeline tests. Basically, it launches all of the pipelines we want to run in order. And then once they're all launched, it checks in a decent order that will match the order that they should finish in. And every one of those launches and every one of those checks is its own @test annotated method. So it supports a lot of different things, like you can make sure in the checks that certain assessors are getting created. You can check to make sure that scans, resources, files are all getting created correctly. And then I've even got some methods in there to make sure that actual values in the assessors look right too. But you can extend that pretty easily too. So that's roughly what one of the launch tests looks like. That's probably one of the longest ones because I've done most of the work in getting this set up for you. So one of these launch methods, assuming that you're getting to the pipeline by the normal build link that's on a session instead of some of the more Cda customized ones, is really just passing in a list of these different elements which tell it what to do once you're in that pipeline launch screen. So this was our free surfer version of the pet unified pipeline, and it's basically just clicking a few different options and launching it. And then when you get to the check step, it's importing some CSVs with a bunch of different results to make sure that everything is going correctly. And this is the stuff that Jenny mentioned earlier today that we run daily on our Jenkins build server. So we have these tests. Great. You get some sort of response from Jenkins, but that's not great if you actually want to be able to look at these later. I mean, you could log into Jenkins, check the build for a certain day, but if you set up the correct settings, these tests will actually integrate with Jira. You have to have the Zephyr plugin, which is a plugin that basically manages tests in Jira. It creates a different issue type called test where you can put in steps. And then you also need the ZAPI plugin, which is a plugin for Zephyr for Jira, which lets you interact with Zephyr with an API. So again, in that at before suite phase, it adds every test that's going to be run into a new test cycle, which is Zephyr's way of saying we have this bucket of things that is going to be run, and everything just starts out unexecuted. Once we hit each one of these tests, it updates the corresponding test to be work in progress. And then there's certain points I've defined in the tests, and this is one of the more complicated parts just because it's tedious that you have to be telling it at this point in the test, update this step. But as it gets through each point in the test, it starts updating the test as it goes along. And then if it hits something that it doesn't expect, it marks that step as failed and fails the test. If it gets to the very end, or if it hits a return in the test method, that's called a success. And that's roughly what it looks like when things are going right. So it also supports things like you can actually be posting a comment to the API, and it'll pass along. Like this was, I think, launching the FBurn Phantom QA pipeline, and I'm actually just updating the workflow ID in XNAT because if you want to check your Cda dev server later in the day, you can see exactly which session it was run on. And it also supports screenshots, which you can just post as attachments to each of the steps. And that's basically just a summary of all the different links that I put throughout here, and you can email me later there. Any questions? Go for it.
How long do your tests take to run?
So the XNAT ones, I think I've got currently about 90. I want to add more. Those take a good 2 to 3 hours. A lot of that is waiting for XNAT because a lot of them are send the session to XNAT, literally wait 5 minutes for the session XML rebuilder to go. And it does that a few times, so that's a lot of the cost. For the pipeline ones, we've got 12 tests, which are 6 pipelines, so it's 6 launches and 6 checks. And that takes basically the free surfer runtime plus 10 minutes. So it's mostly waiting for free surfer. That's kind of the annoying part there.
But this is a really important thing, I think, as you're trying to run a study that may be a 10-year study. And God only knows how your hardware and software and things like that are changing out from under you while the study's going on. And you have no idea what kind of drift you'll be having numerically in your pipeline. By running the same check every single day, you guarantee that at least for that pipeline, for that standard data set that you're testing, you're getting the same number. It's like, I remember I used to be in doing like electrophoresis and DNA sequencing back in the 1800s, and you always ran like the standard when you're running a gel, right? Like you make sure your gel is running properly. It's the exact same thing, right? You have to have some kind of standard to make sure that you're numerically seeing the same things over time. And to me, this is just an essential part of running a robust system over a long period.
So sometimes I forget to say these things, because you're absolutely right there. And I just dive into the detail, and 3 hours is a long time to wait for something to tell you that it's working. And it can be very frustrating as a developer, because I've been there.
Yep.
And I still do it, and still have done it, and still think it was brilliant to do, but that's a long time.
I mean, I don't know if everybody knows what Jenkins is. Is everybody familiar with Jenkins? This is actually the automated, what do we call it, the continuous build platform? Or whatever.
CI platform.
There you go. But anyway, every day it goes in and builds whatever code got checked into XNAT. And it just does that automatically. And as part of doing that build, it makes development machines so people can check out the new thing. It also tells you if someone checked in code that's breaking stuff. But then it's also running careless tests. So you can tell if a developer went in and tweaked a page in a way that's then causing downstream things to break. So it's having Selenium tests, having Jenkins builds, all that is making XNAT a much, much better piece of software. It used to be you guys, as users, tested it for us, like, period.
So released meant start the testing process.
Yeah, exactly. So it's when we release a 1.7 or 1.6.5, it's been tested a lot, and Charlie's truly been transformative in making that happen.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Charlie. If you have questions or you want to, I'm sorry.
Oh boy. Thanks, Jeanette.
As far as getting the test into Jira, did you say that was already in your code on Bitbucket, or?
So you have, this is what I spent like the last month before the workshop presentation on, is you have to have in Jira a test already set up with the steps so that my thing knows what to post to. And it'll update each step individually, but...
Because you have to hard code the IDs of the steps, is that correct?
You don't have to do that, but it does have to know what the steps are. So I just have one mutable int object, which is a step counter, and it gets passed anywhere. And I just, update the next step that it's a pass, and just do that all over the place.
And that code is in your NRG _ Selenium?
Yep.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. You mentioned FreeSurfer. Are you actually running a whole FreeSurfer process as part of the test?
I believe so. Yes. I mean, I'm going. Yeah, I'm going into one of our CNDA. I'm going to one of our CNDA. Oh. Sorry. I'm going to one of our CNDA dev servers and going through the normal XNAT process of launching a pipeline. And then seeing the assessor it generates in that giant table of FreeSurfer values and making sure it's still right.
And you're comparing every single value?
Yeah. So that process takes like 4 minutes, I think, for that one, because it's a lot of stuff.
And you're actually getting the same thing every time?
For FreeSurfer, yes. That was one of the problems we ran into when Jenny and I were designing this, is, Jenny, I don't think it's working right. All these values are wrong. It's like, no, something changed in the meantime. That was actually the pipeline was changing the values. It wasn't us.
You also check if you check sums on files, it also works too, right?
Checksums, do you say? That's a feature I'm somewhat adding, but that's something we wanted for tip mainly, and we haven't gone there too much yet.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So you were working on a feature, I have inside knowledge, of actually comparing image files and seeing the visual results of like JPEGs on the same.
Yeah, I believe I have a class in there that'll do that, but it's just going to do literally an MD5 checksum and make sure.
Like, one tiny pixel in a header, like a timestamp in a header.
Yes, that will be a problem, but there's not an easy way at all for me to do that. So, thanks.